They came from all over New England to compete for one goal, one hope. Almost 300 men and women chasing a dream, a trip to Las Vegas, and a chance to play against the world's best poker players on the game's biggest stage. Now,
only 6 remain.
With the skill, patience, and luck to make it to the televised final table. Only one player will win the opportunity of a lifetime to represent Eastern Poker Tour in the World Series of Poker's main event.
Welcome back to the Eastern Poker Tour's second season of their Tournament of Champions. I'm your host, Bernard Lee, alongside poker veteran Spiro Mitrakostas, and we are back here at the final table. 6 players remain vying for that ultimate poker prize, a seat into the World Series of Poker's main event. Let's see where all players stand in their chips. Well, I think the players are ready to get going. Let's get down to the action. Action is now folded around to Ron in the cutoff. Ron manages a restaurant and lives out of Bellingham, Massachusetts. He makes a call with King Jack offsuit, a very dangerous hand.
Raise.
Now, Andre is the chip leader. He took control of this final table and has over $1 million in chips, where everyone has about half that amount. So I understand this raise here from the button, but he did raise a very little amount. He only raised 1.5 times the big blind. It may entice a call, to be very honest.
Well, Mike folds, and it's up to Paul. And
I'm all in for 310.
Well, Paul, who has been very, very quiet here at the final table, not playing a hand, has now made his last stand for 310,000 chips.
I like this play by Paul. Ron folds, and it's up to Andre.
Well, as people have said, Andre has gotten his hand caught in the cookie jar right now. Even though it's 250,000 chips, he has already committed 100,000 chips. I think this is a very difficult call. Why risk another quarter of your stack here with only Jack-10 suited?
I agree with you. If he knew that Paul had ace-queen, though, and there was only a 3-2 underdog, I think he would call, but obviously not knowing that, this has to be a fold.
250?
Not only could Paul have an overpair, but Paul also could have ace-jack here and really have him dominated and put him in really, really bad shape.
He's doing the math.
Folds his hand and allows Paul from Johnston, Rhode Island, to take in the
And Paul moves up to 555,000 in chips, putting himself in middle position now.
Well, Paul takes down a very, very substantial pot. The first time he makes a big move at the final table and takes down 160,000 chips. Now, with his $500,000 chip stack, he's right back in the tournament. Well, the action's back here with Scott under the gun. With blinds 20,000 and 40,000, Scott, well, he picks up American Airlines here.
The mother of all poker hands.
He raises to 120,000, 3 times the big blind. Let's see if somebody else will give him a little bit of action and potentially,
Well, he's hoping.
absolutely, potentially to give him some significant chips and really, really turn around his final table. Scott started the final table as the chip leader. Surprisingly, Dan in the big blind folds pocket sevens.
I am surprised he didn't even take his time there, and there was only 80,000 more to call, so.
Good fold by Dan there. Maybe he recognized that Scott, who's a very, very solid player, made a solid raise from under the gun. Action has folded around to Mike Buckley. Blinds are 20,000 and 40,000.
Michael's got the Varconi, the Robert Varconi hand, Queen 10 off suit, and he makes a call. Robert won the 2002 World Series of Poker with that.
Michael, a 32-year-old history teacher from Rhode Island. He's been playing for 2 years.
120.
Well, it's an unfortunate time because Dan Sullivan has picked up pocket aces from the button.
He raises to 120. Not a huge raise. Scott folds, Ron folds, and it's back to Michael.
Well, Mike's got to call 80,000 more, about 25% of his stack here. This is, I think, a good fold. Of course, after I say that, he makes the call. I think a fold here would have been a good decision because he could have easily been dominated.
Gave a little chuckle as he made the call.
This could be a disastrous flop as Mike has hit top pair.
Check.
Dan obviously is not going anywhere.
100.
Well, Michael checks and Dan bets 100 here, which is a nice bet. The only thing he's going to fear is a deuce, which really shouldn't be in Mike's hand.
Oh. The deuces are out there with you, huh?
Well, they kiddingly joke about it because Dan has been playing a lot of pocket deuces. Mike is kind of giving off this sense of weakness, but you have this feeling that Mike has definitely hit a piece of it, and he has. He's obviously hit top pair.
Mullen.
Call.
An instant all-in and an instant call
You
by
don't have a
Dan,
deuce under
and
No.
Michael's tournament life is at stake, and he's a 9-1 underdog.
I wish I had a deuce under there.
No 10,
You got
please.
some outs?
Or queen. No 10 or queen. Oh, queen's fine.
No. A couple queens would be good.
Well,
Couple
Dan in
ladies.
his
They've been good to
euphoria
me.
didn't realize that a queen doesn't hurt him because he said no queen, and then he realized quickly that a queen will not hurt him.
I wouldn't mind it too.
Oh, time to pack it in.
Don't do that. That's the whammy on me.
And Mike is now down to his last card. And Michael's tournament life has ended.
Well, two players from Rhode Island have battled it out, and unfortunately, Mike from Warwick, Rhode Island, is now our sixth place
It's been
finisher.
a ton of fun, man.
Good luck, man.
Thanks.
His hand, the Varconi Queen 10, unfortunately could not overcome the pocket aces of Dan
That was Resista Clarona.
on the Eastern Poker Tour's Tournament of Champions.
Visit EasternPokerTour.com to see how you can be at the next final table.
Well, welcome back to the Eastern Poker Tour's Tournament of Champions. We are down to our final 5 players. Let's get down to the action. And the blinds are 20,000 and 40,000. 40 to go. First to act is Paul. Paul quickly folds. Dan Sullivan
120.
decides to raise here.
Can't blame the man, ace queen suited.
Raises to 120,000, about 3 times the big blind.
And another monster hand. We had aces, and now Scott wakes up with pocket kings.
Well, Scott has seen a downward spiral since the beginning of this final table. He entered the final table as the chip leader and really has not been able to recover after a couple of big hands. Hopefully, he'll double up here
do that
and
all
get
the time.
right back into the thick of things.
No, it's not. Because
The other two players have quickly folded, and the action is now up to Dan.
205,000 for Dan to call. He makes the call. He's getting the correct pot odds.
He unfortunately is way behind, about a 70-30 underdog here, and we will see if Scott's kings will hold up.
Scott looks a little nervous here.
Well, understandably so. Anytime your tournament life is on the line, it is definitely a nerve-wracking situation. The flop is very nice, 8-8-9. The turn is a 5.
Beautiful. Keep it black. Throw another
Ooh, that
spade.
took a lot of outs away because that's the third spade. So if the ace or queen of spades comes, it's no good. And Scott's hand holds up.
Easy come, easy go. Good hand.
That's how Lowell rolls. That's right.
Well, Scott Tremblay from Lowell, Massachusetts, who was our chip leader when we started the final table, has now finally gotten back on track. His pocket kings have beaten Dan's ace-queen, and now he has over 700,000 chips and is right back in the thick of things. Let's get back down to the action. The blinds have increased to 30,000 and 60,000,
180.
and Dan decides to make a raise to 180,000 here with a suited ace.
Well, with 5 players left and only 10 cards being dealt out, any ace is a raisable hand.
I'm gonna raise. Mullen.
Well, unfortunately for Dan here, Ron on the button decides to push all in. He pushes all in for about 500,000 in total. So right now, Dan has a fairly important decision to make for about 320,000 more chips.
a lot.
It's probably about 40% of his stack right now remaining. This is a critical decision for Dan. Does he believe Ron, or is Ron on a bluff? He's really going to have to make a tough decision.
Well, I think this is a fold here for Dan. There's not many hands at all that he's ahead of. And he does make the right decision in folding. And a nice little pickup there for Ron. And now his chip count goes up over 800,000.
Right now, this is a real seesaw battle with the remaining players. Each player is taking their shots at certain pots, and each player is taking down some significant pots. All the chips are just kind of moving around, and really, someone's going to have to take a stand to make an impact here at this final table. Well, let's get back down to the action where the blinds are 30,000 and 60,000. After Ron folds, Andre decides to call here with ace-4 suited. I'm not sure about this play. With 5 people left, I would say to make a raise here to try to really take the pot down.
But the previous hand, you remember, Dan raised with a rag ace, and then he had to release his hand when he was re-raised, and it cost him 180,000 chips.
Right. So maybe he was thinking about that when he made the call.
Very possibly.
Well, both blinds call here, and with a flop of ace-6-3, Andre is really taking control of this hand. He decides to bet 100,000 into this pot, and both blinds look like they are quickly folding.
Nice little pickup there for Andre.
So Andre, who picks up that small pot, just continues to build his chip lead. He's got about 1.2 million, where 3 players have about 800,000, and Paul is bringing up the rear with about 500,000 in chips. Let's get back down to the action.
All right, 60 to go.
Back down to the action. Blinds again are 30,000 and 60,000. Scott quickly folds.
And Ron has one of my favorite hands, a pair of 5s, the year I was born.
Raise.
Well, Ron's obviously thinks that it's a good hand for him, as well as he is going to raise to 220,000.
Nice little raise there.
220 more.
He's actually made it to 280,000. He raised 220,000 on top of the 60,000. But Dan here with ace-queen decides to push all in. I think a very difficult decision for Ron here. Pretty much it would be for almost all of Ron's chips for 200,000 more.
Well, he's getting a 2.5, almost 3 to 1 on his call here, but he has to know that at best he's in a race situation. There's only 3 hands he's dominating, and that would be the 2s, 3s, and 4s.
2.
Does he feel like making it a race?
Unless he thinks Dan is really trying to get him out of the pot, like you said, with 2s, 3s, or 4s, maybe with an ace-4, ace-3. Beside that, he's just hoping for a race, as you said. Ron has a very, very difficult decision for his tournament life. Let's see if he can lay this down.
Well, there hasn't been too much bluffing at this table so far, Bernard.
That's
Most
true.
of the play has been straightforward, so I'm sure he's giving me... Well, he gave him credit for a hand, maybe not. He did call. And off to the races we go.
And one of those.
Dan has said that he's a little worried that he might be going home as well. Obviously, he knows that he has to go for a race. Be a little difficult for Ron to have had 2 overcards to Dan's ace-queen, but we'll see how it all plays out right now. As you said, we're off to the races and off to the flop. Well, again, a pretty harmless flop there. 2-7 jack.
Well, Dan needs either running cards to make a straight, running cards to make a flush, and there's one card that opens up some avenues for him.
Ace, queen, king.
He needs an ace, a king, or a queen to stay alive in this tournament.
Oh, and there
Gets the ace on the river.
another river card here at this tournament. It's absolutely amazing.
How many times are we going to see it today?
In some respects, it's a little bit of payback, right? Because Ron did suck out on the ace-9 previously.
You got it back from the ace-9, see?
Well, my lucky 5s didn't hold up there, Bernard.
Well, absolutely. The 5s did not win the race. Ace-queen survived. And let's get back down to the action. We're back down to the action. Blinds are 30,000 and 60,000, and Ron has just been crippled on a very, very unfortunate hand. And he's decided to push all in with a very marginal hand here, Jack Deuce. He really almost doesn't have a choice. He's only got 185,000 in total, so maybe he didn't have a choice here. He has to push in with any two cards and hope he can win the blinds and antes. Scott in the big blind holding a marginal is saying it nicely. A 9-4 offsuit, and may have to make the call for 125,000 here.
I call.
He does make the call.
Well, Jack Deuce against 4-9. Actually, and amazingly, Ron is a favorite to win this hand with his Jack Deuce.
I'm sure Ron was very pleased at this situation. Both of them saying, I'm sorry I had to make the call, but Ron completely understood. But when he flipped over his cards, a 60-40 favorite, I'm sure he would take it every time. Let's see the flop. Well, a 10-7-5 board is going to keep Ron in the lead, increasing his odds of winning the hand to 70-30. 10 of hearts on the turn really doesn't provide much help for Scott. Scott's going to have to hit a 9 or a 4 to eliminate Ron in 5th place.
And Ron survives.
Well, after that hand, Ron now doubled up to about 400,000. Not in great shape, but not as desperate as he was before on the Eastern Poker Tour's Tournament of Champions.
Visit EasternPokerTour.com to see how you can be at the next final table. Welcome back to the Eastern Poker Tour Tournament of Champions.
5 players are left vying for that ultimate prize, a seat into the World Series of Poker's main events. Let's see how the action unfolds. Action begins with Paul, who folds. The blinds are 30 and 60,000. Dan decides to call here with his pocket deuces.
Quack, quack.
Slowly becoming one of his favorite hands. They've been talking about deuces with Dan. Mike talked about it before he got eliminated.
Ron calls from the small blind with a 6-5 of diamonds, one of my favorite hands also.
Andre's thinking about it, but he decides to just check and see the flop. He was thinking about it for a second. He definitely was.
3-way coin flip.
Well, this is a nice flop for Dan. He's hit his set of deuces. King, Jack, deuce, 2 clubs.
Check.
As both blinds check.
Hundred's the bet.
Makes a nice little bet here of 100,000.
That's a very nice bet.
I like that bet.
Oh,
I'm actually going to show because these just have been so great to me today.
Well, as Dan has said, he showed his pocket deuces because he said that this hand has been so great to him. It's definitely becoming one of his favorite hands.
all right. Buttons right, 36.
Blinds are 30,000 and 60,000. Dan under the gun has decided to call again with ace-7. We've seen a lot of this. Ace rag with very few players left, and they're just limping in. I'm a little bit curious on why they're doing this. I think a little more aggression might be better.
Well, it seems that people have not been re-raising them, so the players have been willing to see flops and take their chances from there.
Well, you've got Paul in the big blind checking his option with Jack-5. Well, it's worked out for Dan right here. He's flop top pair, ace queen 10. Well, Paul is betting, and Paul has just walked into a trap, I think. This is not a good situation for Paul. Only a gut shot straight draw.
What would Sister Clarona do here?
Well, Dan is looking up to the heavens for some help.
She'd slap me for playing cards.
Wow!
I'm very surprised
I am
there.
absolutely stunned that Dan just laid down top pair.
Well, I think Paul made his play there because Dan didn't raise before the flop, so he figured he didn't have an ace and he could take him off the hand.
36.
But Dan did have an ace and he folded his hand.
Spiro, that is very, very surprising. A fold from Dan there after hitting the ace.
I'm surprised myself. I know why Paul bet, because he didn't put Dan on an ace.
Absolutely.
Because Dan didn't raise before the flop. He made his bluff bet and it worked.
Just amazing. Obviously, with 5 players left to go, you hit top pair after limping in What was the hand that Dan was worried about? I'm not really sure. Queen 10, King Jack. I mean, there are very few hands there that really have him crushed. A very, very surprising play. Let's see if it comes back to haunt him later on.
I don't know if he was thinking. He made his decision very quickly after consulting with Lady Clarona.
Well, we'll see what happens. Let's get back to the action. The blinds are 30,000 and 60,000. Action is over to Ron after Scott folds. Ron does the same.
60.
We now have a blind versus blind.
I'm gonna raise.
Paul's going to raise his king deuce here.
100.
Paul was very, very quiet early on in this final table and now has suddenly come alive.
And a re-raise by Dan, who's got the real hand here,
Raise to
raised king of
300.
diamonds, and a nice raise to 300,000. I like this a lot.
You can't fault Paul for raising there. He's in the small blind, he has queen deuce, and the average starting hand for anything heads up is queen 7. They say that anything queen 7 or above, you should be raising. So I really don't blame him for that raise. He's been very, very quiet at the beginning of this final table and has now really started to pick it up a little bit. Just unfortunate for him that Dan picked up big slick. Well, let's see if he can come back from this, and let's get back down to the action. Again, blinds are 30,000 and 60,000. Over to the suddenly aggressive Paul, who does fold. Dan decides to be very, very tricky, limping with aces on the button. Well, Scott has fallen for the trap, pushed all in with a solid hand with jacks on the small blind.
I love this play. That's one of my favorite plays, Bernard, limping on the button with a huge hand.
Of course, Dan instantly calls, and it is a very difficult situation right now for Scott.
Anybody fold one? Anyone? Anyone? Jacks, fold one.
He's looking a little grim right now. He asked if anyone folded a jack. You have to feel for him. With 5 people, when you pick up a pair of jacks, you have to figure that you're going to win that hand.
Scott has unfortunately had a very, very rough ride here at the final table, and it could come to an end right here. Scott's nickname is Big Daddy, and he needs a lot of help. Not a good flop at all. Nothing of his suit. 9-7 deuce. He's really going to need one of those jacks. 5 of spades on the turn.
Scott's down to his last card here.
And unfortunately, with that 9 of diamonds, we have eliminated our 4th player. Well, I'm sure Scott, who is a third shift manager, would definitely have loved to play all night long. But unfortunately, his pocket jacks were beaten by Dan's pocket aces, and now he is eliminated in 5th place. When we come back next week, the final 4 will battle it out for the top prize here at the Eastern Poker Tour's Tournament of Champions. For Spiro Mitrakostas, I'm Bernard Lee. See you next week here on the EPT's Tournament of Champions.
Tune in next week to see the remaining players at the final table battle it out for the ultimate prize, a trip to Las Vegas and a seat at the World Series of Poker's main event. They are one step closer to winning millions. Don't just watch the final table action. If you think you have what it takes to make it to the next final table at the EPT Tournament of Champions, log on to www.easternpokertour.com to see how Eastern Poker Tour can put you in the spotlight and make your poker dreams a reality.
Met a lot of nice people, and to give me the opportunity to go to Vegas, something I never would do on my own, is just awesome.
The Eastern Poker Tour has been great. It's an opportunity to play live with other people as opposed to playing online. A lot of different people, a lot of different skill sets playing face to face. So it's a learning experience every night.
I mean, where else can you put $10 down on a table one night, BS your way through 230 other people, and be sitting at a final table with 1 in 8 shot at going to Vegas, I guess. I mean, you can't beat that.
The Eastern Poker Tour is a series of free pub poker tournaments held throughout New England. Just win one free pub tournament and you guarantee yourself a seat at the next televised Tournament of Champions.
I love you, baby!
For more information and a schedule of local events, log on to easternpokertour.com.